Well, good morning, and can I welcome everyone to this, the 16th meeting of the Public Audit Committee in 2025. Agenda item 1 is for the committee to decide whether or not this morning to take agenda items 3, 4 and 5 in private. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. So agenda item 2 is consideration of the Scottish Government's approach to financial interventions, and in particular to look at the Strategic Commercial Assets Division and its work. So I am very pleased this morning to welcome, to give evidence to the committee, Gregor Irwin, who's the Director General Economy, Colin Cook, who is the Director of Economic Development in the Scottish Government, and Dermot Rattigan, who's a Deputy Director and is the lead on the Strategic Commercial Assets Division in the Scottish Government. We've got some questions to put to you this morning. Before we get to those questions, Director General, could I invite you to make an opening statement?
Thank you very much, Convener. We do welcome the opportunity to discuss the work of the Strategic Commercial Assets Division and in particular the Transparency Review this morning. Topics raised in this committee have shaped the content of that review and the approach. And in the first phase, we prioritised for release reports relating to the written authority for the completion of vessel 802 Glenrosa at Ferguson Marine, which has been a priority for this committee, and also the government's intervention with BIFAB. Striking the right balance between transparency and protecting commercially sensitive material and legal rights. It's not always straightforward. It does require careful judgment and consultation with stakeholders. We do appreciate that the committee remains concerned about the redactions in some of the material we released in February. We are committed to periodic review of our approach and are very open to challenge on our processes. As the committee has noted in correspondence to us, one of the reports we shared on the 7th of February from First Marine International, that was substantially redacted. We devoted considerable attention to reviewing that particular report with FMI and with Ferguson Marine. The government's contract with FMI and its associated disclaimer accords the authors significant legal rights that could not simply be put aside. Moreover, the management team at Ferguson Marine regard that report as particularly sensitive while it remains the foundation for the yard's transformation and investment plan. Now, that contrasts with the BIFAB evaluation, which was released in full. In that case, no commercial interests remain live, and the focus of that report is on actions taken by the government and the results achieved by that. EY's independent analysis quantifies both the narrow commercial and the broader economic outcomes of that intervention. They do so by using a range of benefit to cost ratios. It identifies good practice, areas for improvement and lessons learned. We accept EY's findings and we have addressed the substance of the report's 5 main recommendations, although not always exactly in the manner proposed by EY, and that's something we'd be happy to explain to the committee. The report of findings and recommendations of the Strategic Commercial Assets Transparency Review, which we sent to the committee on the 4th of April, that made 8 recommendations to Scottish ministers, which have been accepted. Now, in combination, the implementation of these recommendations, which is now underway, that will improve transparency and promote accountability. So, among other things, we will establish a transparency assurance panel to review commercial advice for publication on a 6-monthly cycle. We will amend the terms and conditions of our procurement of commercial advice to promote access to information. And we will publish a summary of all shareholder approval requests from the businesses sponsored by the Strategic Commercial Assets Division. And I hope you will recognise that the review as a whole is a positive initiative, and look forward to taking your questions on that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. We do have questions indeed on those areas that you've outlined in your introductory remarks, Director General, and we will get to those in due course. Before we get to some of those broader points, I'm going to invite Stuart McMillan to put some, first of all, I think a couple of general questions, but then I think Mr McMillan wants to talk with you in some detail about the FMPG situation. So, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Convener. Just thank you, gentlemen, for your, certainly, and Mr Irwin, for your comments this morning. With regards to the transparency review, work stream 2 is the freedom of information. Can you let me know how many, of the FOIs, 95% have been replied to within the deadline. How many FOIs have came in?
I think I'll need to ask Dermot to provide that information. We do receive a lot of FOIs, but Dermot.
I don't have the number for the last year, but I can find it out for you very quickly. So I would get back to you today on that. We can give you, depending how far you want to go back. If you want to go back a year or 2 years, etc.
So obviously SCAD came into being in 22, 23.
Yep.
Maybe go back to
okay.
that'd be helpful.
Yep.
On an annual basis. Also, have you taken on any additional staff to deal with the FOI requests?
I'll pick that up. So there was a time where our performance in responding to FOIs within SCAD was not what we wanted it to be. And across the government, the Permanent Secretary was in touch with the Freedom of Information Commissioner. In our own area, we haven't taken on new staff, but we've organised ourselves differently to have a greater focus on meeting deadlines. So we think we've made a lot of progress in the last year. Each case gets allocated to a case officer, but also we have our project management office oversee deadlines, keeping everything on track. There's staff also in Colin's Directorate office we meet with them weekly, who they go through all of the cases under Colin's Directorate. So there's a lot more tracking of the cases, and I think we've seen the benefit of that in now reaching 100% compliance more recently.
And if I could just add, right across DG Economy, there's been an intense focus on responding to FOI requests in a timely manner. And over the past 15 months, we're pretty close to 100% success rate in doing that. I don't think it's exactly 100%, but close to.
Okay, that's helpful. Certainly, if you can provide information, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Now, just on Ferguson Marine, Port Glasgow, it's and certainly, Mr Irwin, you touched upon also the reports that were sent to the committee from the First Marine International, and also there's 6 different reports there. And the covering letter accompanying that, also, so the first study was based on 2020, 2021, which in effect was about having the benchmarking. And then the second study, 2023, was for the potential improvement study. I'm keen to try and understand between those 2 reports and the level of scrutiny that the division has placed upon the yard with that information. Obviously, yourselves clearly have the unredacted version as compared to us, but for yourselves having that information in terms of kind of what activity has the division undertaken, bearing in mind how politically sensitive the situation with Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow is, how many jobs are involved with the yard as well. So I'm keen to get a bit more understanding in terms of what input does your division and do yourselves actually have with regards to the yard?
Sorry, are you referring specifically to the period between when these 2 reports were produced, or more generally?
No, generally. Because also, so
the regular rhythm of engagement with the yard?
Yes, also the first study is clearly about the benchmarking, so you've got a good indication from when you came in 22, 23, so you've got a good indication of that was the benchmark point. So, okay. What engagement do you have with the yard?
So I might ask Dermot to describe that. He's obviously closer to that.
So these are important reports. So the first one was initiated by the management of the business to benchmark their own position against competitors. It's not, you need to use an outside contractor to do that because they're in and out of other shipyards internationally and they have information that Ferguson themselves don't have. The second report was more about essentially what the improvements should be, specifying the types of equipment the yard should be buying, where they should be aiming to be benchmarked against the best in different cohorts internationally. It specifies particularly types of equipment, and it also goes through things like layout of the yard, how the layout should be arranged to create a process flow which would be more optimal. Where that's gone forward since that second report, it's been used really as the basis of the capital investment plan that the yard have produced. So I think in the FMI report, they talked about around £14 million worth of capital. So when ministers announced the kind of the level of money that we would be able to put into a capital investment programme, it was benchmarked from that report. What the yard have done since is for the longer lead time items, they've been doing survey work, etc., to know how those items would come into the yard. So say if they've recently, if you look on Public Contract Scotland, you will see that they've advertised for a semi-automated panel line. They advertised that on the 5th of March, but before that they need to work out, is the electrical system in the yard capable of installing an automated panel line? Where would it go? How would that affect other process flows in the yard? So it's very much a live document, and the yard are using it all the time, and it's really the basis for what they're procuring now, how they're going to organise the yard in future. So that's how they are using it, and we discuss that report with the yard. They bring forward their capital expenditure plans to us that we look at. So it's being used all the time, and I think where you would start to see it would be as these new items of kit are delivered to the yard and installed.
Excuse me, I would assume that yourselves would not have any dealings from basically operational day-to-day activities.
No, that's correct.
Right. And in terms of the contracts from Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow, would all contracts go on to Public Contract Scotland?
So there's
if they're above the threshold.
The way the companies were structured, they were structured deliberately in a way that there's a holding company on top. There's the 801, 802 company, so that controls the contracts for Glen Rosa, Glen Sannox. There's also a commercial entity there. So anything that is commercial work is not covered by public law. So they're not required to do public procurement for items that are being purchased for commercial work. But for the other entities, they would use Public Contract Scotland. So one of the subsidiaries, Ferguson Marine Port Glasgow Limited, that holds all the assets of the business and it holds all the staff. When they are buying kit, infrastructure for the yard, they would procure it through Public Contract Scotland.
Right. So that information is quite helpful, to be fair. In terms of the division, how would you assess the effectiveness of the previous decisions, either to intervene in a particular business or not to intervene, or to make decisions around the follow-on investments such as the recent £14.2 million for Ferguson's?
Look, I would say one of the strengths of the approach that we've adopted in recent years is we have gathered together in the division the best possible expertise from across government, both within the staffing of the division, but also in the relationships that staff in the division have with other parts of government. So we have made a deliberate choice through the creation of the division to ensure that we've got the best available expertise focused on the work of overseeing strategic commercial assets. Alongside that, and this has been created over a period of time and it's still a work in process, we have established frameworks and methods of operating that have allowed us to assess investment decisions of an individual business such as Ferguson Marine, or potential interventions in a much more rigorous manner, which is fully consistent with Green Book principles, SPFM. And that, as I say, that has been built up over a period of time. We draw in external commercial expertise where appropriate to complement the internal expertise that is available. The business investment framework is now part of the SPFM. We're working on an assurance playbook, which essentially provides a ready-made plan that can be adapted to specific circumstances that we may face when dealing with individual interventions. When it comes to the question of how successful we've been in each and every one of the decisions that we take, of course, some questions are more, some decisions that we take around a specific investment will be more significant than others, and they will require much higher assurance. And specifically in the case of the proposed capital investment in Ferguson Marine, we've been very clear that that needs to be subject to good due diligence. It must comply with subsidy control rules and legislation, and that in particular means that it must be consistent with meeting the commercial market operator test. So that's an example of where working with advisors and the yard to ensure that the commercial strategy and the business plan is as strong as it possibly can be. That's absolutely critical. But then at the appropriate stage, ensuring that we have appropriate external due diligence of that proposition so that we can ensure that it's compliant with legislation. That's also important. And we're doing everything we can to do that in a timely manner, but we have to operate within those legal frameworks.
So with that, would you, in terms of that expertise, would you actually get somebody who has an understanding and experience within the shipbuilding industry to give you that advice?
So we draw on CMAL as our technical advisors on shipbuilding, and we have used external advisors, including FMI, to provide specific shipbuilding expertise. But Colin, you may wish to add to that.
I would just say we spent some time, as this committee is aware, developing a framework agreement that manages the relationship between Scottish Government and FMPG. That sets out the respective responsibilities of the Chair, the Board, Scottish Ministers, myself, Gregor in his role, SCAD. So this is all laid out and understood. We have, over the past few years, I think, firstly, as Gregor said, taken external shipbuilding advice where it's appropriate. The FMI report is an example of that. We've also supported the chair of Ferguson Marine to strengthen the amount of shipbuilding expertise on his board, and the most recent non-executive director recruitment round further enhanced that and put a very experienced shipbuilding man onto the board. And of course, we've recently recruited, or the chair has recently recruited, a new chief executive with a background in project and program management from the shipbuilding industry. So all of those things, I think, are about strengthening the understanding of the industry that they operate in.
Certainly, building a commercial ship is different from building a naval ship, and that's a continual comment that you'll hear. So I've not yet had the opportunity to meet the new chief exec, but I know that's being worked on to get that sorted out. The reason why I'm asking these particular questions is, the FMI report, well, the reports are actually very clear in terms of some of the challenges, and certainly in one of the reports, there's a particular comment here, just that the new cost forecasting processes appear to be adequate and an improvement on previous systems. However, this is clearly reliant on accurate drawings, design and engineering information. Now, I know that there will be some questions regarding obviously the Glen Rosa and obviously the announcement from within the last couple of weeks. But when you get that type of report that that highlights that there are still challenges, that's not helpful, to say the least. It's not helpful in terms of the future of the yard, and notwithstanding the strengthening of the board, it does, for me, it does beg the question in terms of the strength of the board that was there beforehand. And I'm not casting any aspersions on any individual, but just as an entity. For me, it's the complete lack of leadership at board level in terms of scrutinising what's actually taking place on the shop floor, what's happening certainly within management of the yard. So I generally have concerns in terms of kind of where that is, because the fact is, well, they've just lost 2 orders.
I think there's. I don't think anybody involved in Ferguson Marine, let alone the current board or management team, would dispute the challenges they faced over the last few years. That's self-evident to everybody. What I would say is that the current board do engage with the trade unions, for example. At every board meeting, the trade union is invited to come and give.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, but they are only allowed in for 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That is unacceptable.
And I think you know, the recent meeting, and Dermot attended it, the union and yourself and others raised these questions about employee voice, and we have taken those up with the board and with the chair. So I think everybody acknowledges that there's more to do to strengthen that engagement, and that will be critical as we look to invest in the future of the yard and develop and implement the new business strategy which the yard has put together, which acknowledges some of these weaknesses, some of the weaknesses in functions around design, for example, and has an approach to deal with them.
So I think, in all fairness to the shop stewards, I mean, they have been asking to have more of an input for quite some time. Yeah. It shouldn't have to take a meeting that I organised with the Deputy First Minister and 2 shop stewards to get that point raised yet again when the shop stewards have been raising these points directly to the chair of the board and to the organisation. Because fundamentally, the shop stewards actually want the yard to survive. They want it to thrive. So if it's going to happen going forward, if there's going to be a better sense of engagement, then I welcome that, and I'm sure that will be welcomed on the shop floor as well. But it shouldn't have to take that type of action for that to happen. So certainly in the document, so we recently received documentation, correspondence from the Permanent Secretary to the Scottish Government, and in that, I'll read out this particular quote from it, and it's: "The directors of FMPG have raised concerns about the ability to operate in a fully commercial manner, taking account of their responsibilities and liabilities as directors under the Companies Act, alongside constraints on their commercial decisions by virtue of compliance with Scottish Government guidance, such as the Scottish Public Finance Manual." When I read that, my first thought was, notwithstanding the legal aspect, that directors clearly have to operate under, and I do not differ from that at all. When I first read that, I thought, that looks as if the directors are passing the buck because they haven't undertaken their duties the way they should have. Would you agree with that?
So I would say there are. It's undoubtedly the case that a commercial business under public ownership operates in a different environment and faces constraints that a privately owned business would not face. And we are acutely aware of the importance of ensuring, as set out in the framework agreement, that Ferguson Marine operates in an appropriate manner, given that the government is the shareholder of Ferguson Marine. As we do that, and as we work with the yards, and the directors and the workers at the yard both share an interest, a strong interest, a passionate interest in securing a sustainable future for the yard, we need to work with them constructively to allow them to fulfil their obligations as part of the public sector, while also being able to operate in a way which allows them to win business and to secure a sustainable future for the yard. So this is an example of a challenge that we face on a continuing basis. But the framework agreement is the vehicle for addressing many of those challenges, because and we've revised it recently, we revised it in October last year. It's essential that provides clarity on who is responsible for what and what the expectations are, and that's based on a sort of proper conversation about the trade-offs and tensions that may be involved in the way that I've just described.
I don't dispute that in any way, shape or form, because I generally recognise that it is a different operating model. And we've already heard today, you don't deal with the day-to-day. Obviously, that's for others. But the fact that the yard clearly has not been competitive. If there was more scrutiny placed upon the day-to-day, obviously whether it's scrutiny upon the accounting officer, or whether it's on obviously by the new chief exec that's in the business, and he obviously has to be given time to prove his worth. But if there's more scrutiny getting placed upon the day-to-day, then that surely will actually help in terms of making the yard competitive. Now, it can't compete with China. Very few can compete with many countries where the labour costs are a lot less. And I think we would all acknowledge that. But there are things that the yard can do, and has done in the past, that it can compete. But the cost situation is clearly hampering what's going on. So I implore yourselves and your staff to have more of an input, have more of a scrutiny function and that due diligence on the day-to-day operations of the yard.
Sorry. I was going to say, wholeheartedly agree with you when it comes to that scrutiny function. I think that's an essential part of what we do. Look, I do think it's essential that all three parties to this, so that's government, the boards, and the workers at Ferguson Marine, that we work together closely, collaboratively, constructively, seeking to achieve the same objective: secure a sustainable future of the yard while delivering the vessel at minimum cost in a timely manner. Clearly challenges, very severe challenges in that regard. As we do that, we also need to be mindful of the expertise that we bring to that challenge, and strike the right balance in terms of providing space for decisions to be made by the appropriate party. But close working scrutiny by government of decisions made by the board and the management team, that is absolutely essential. And the very clear instruction from the Deputy First Minister following this most recent increase in the cost forecast and delay to the delivery of the vessel is that we absolutely need to double down in that scrutiny. She's asked for a weekly review group to be set up to work alongside existing project management processes. And that weekly review group is the vehicle for providing that scrutiny, and we fully intend to make that process work well.
Notwithstanding the two new people who have joined the board, do you have confidence in the chair of the board and also the board?
So I have absolute confidence that the board are doing everything that they possibly can within the powers available to them to work with the team at the yard, the workforce, the unions, and with government to secure the best possible outcome for Ferguson Marine. Equally, I'm also very conscious that it does take it takes a special person at this moment to step up and to offer and to be willing to play a leadership role at Ferguson Marine. And that's true of Graham Thompson, who stepped up to be chief executive. And I think it's also true to people who are willing to come onto the board at the moment. The easy thing for people to do would be to step away from that because of the challenges faced at the yards. So I think we need to recognise that as well.
And final question, Convener. So going back to the First Marine International reports, Obviously, as the version we have, it's heavily redacted. There's generally some very useful and helpful information in what we do have, but also it's still very heavily redacted. So can you clarify to what extent the Scottish Government officials challenged the levels of redactions in the reports, or whether FMI provided you with rationale for the areas that they deemed to be too commercially sensitive to release?
So I might ask Dermot to describe that process and to answer your question, and I may want to add to it as well.
So the overall process for the transparency review was that we set up a team within SCAD, but the initial team was not set up with people that were involved with commissioning these reports, so they were already a step away from the reports. We did our own review of all of the reports, and then we made contact with the authors of the reports. So Gregor mentioned it in his opening statement, we sign up to terms and conditions with the authors of the reports, sign up to how those reports can be used and shared, etc. We took legal advice about whether we could ignore the conditions that we'd set or step away from them, what was the risk of that, etc. Received very clear advice that the government should stick to the terms of its legal agreement. So what that then prompted us to do was to be in touch with FMI. We spoke to the particular, not just someone in head office, but the author of the report. Talked about what was in the report, what would be sensitive for the business, but also what would be sensitive for FMI, because FMI make their money from selling these kind of reports. The thing that they emphasised to us was they have a lot of their own intellectual property in there. It reveals how they go about benchmarking shipyards, their processes, etc. They were worried for their own commercial interests, so we spoke to them, but we also spoke to Ferguson Marine. So they did two reports. One was for the shipyard, and then the second one was for us. From the Ferguson Marine's point of view, they see the report, as I've said, as a live document, so they see it as very sensitive. It's not the sort of thing they would want to be shared with their competitors or clients who are looking at placing work with the yard. We worked through it. I think with FMI, we would have had at least 3 or 4 phone calls, I think, with the author of the report, discussing the material that they thought should be redacted. We were certainly saying one option would be to release nothing from the report. The second would be at least to release material that would show the structure of the report, what it looked at, etc. So we negotiated, I suppose the best way to put it, we negotiated on what could be released. But under the terms of our contract, we had to have FMI's permission to release what has been released. They did cooperate with us. They didn't charge us any extra money for the discussions that we had with them. But they didn't want to go beyond that point. And because that one was so heavily redacted, they did write the letter, which is dated 6th February, and we included it in the pack because we thought actually that was them saying in their own words their attitude to the report and why it was sensitive. And they did make the point that they weren't aware of any other report like that having ever made its way into the public domain, and they work internationally.
Sure.
If I can just add a few points. So that report, if it's subject to an FOI request, we will address that in a manner consistent with our existing processes and the legislation. What we want to do is to get ahead of FOI requests and preemptively release reports. What this experience has shown is that there are limits to what we can do there. So we are, and it's one of the recommendations in the review, we are serious about amending our terms and conditions so that we can ensure that we are able to be as transparent as possible and to release in unredacted form as much information as possible. There's also something that we can do in terms of how we structure commissions for reports to try and ensure that some elements of those reports can be issued in an unredacted form in a way which really provides meaningful information about the contents of the report. The last thing I would say, there is, as is always the case when it comes to strategic commercial assets, there are tensions here because we have to be able to contract with people like FMI in future, and we don't want FMI to say that's the Scottish Government, they're going to give away our intellectual property, and we don't want to contract with them because that will damage our ability to support a sustainable future for Ferguson Marine and potentially other strategic commercial asset interventions in future. So we need to be mindful of that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, but the default position of this contract with FMI was secrecy, wasn't it? I mean, the letter that you wrote to me on the 4th of April this year has got 2 paragraphs in it. The first one talks about all information will be treated as commercial in confidence by the parties. That was the condition of your contractual arrangement with FMI. But on top of that, it said, in addition, FMI applied a disclaimer to the report which requires their consent for the report or information contained within the report to be shared beyond the parties to the contract.
So we're very clear we want to change our approach to contracting similar reports in future to support transparency and to ensure that we're able to release information in a way which doesn't jeopardise commercially confidential information. And that's one of the lessons from the review, and that's reflected in the recommendations as well. So this is something that we're very keen to address, and we think it's important.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned about FMI's track record and its intellectual property rights. Were they required to disclose who else they work for when they were commissioned to do this piece of work?
The other clients?
Yeah, well, the other shipyards who are potentially in competition with Ferguson Marine for some of these contracts, for example. Are they required? Is there a disclosure clause which means that you understand who else are a part of their client base to ensure there's no conflict of interest, for example?
I'll pass to Dermot and Colin if they're able to answer this information, or it may be that we need to follow up with you on that. But of course, there are devices that are used in contracts to protect commercial information. This is precisely the issue that you're raising, and it works both ways. Well,
it doesn't work both ways, does it? Because we're sat here without any information, hardly at all, and it's all at the say-so of this overseas-owned multinational consultancy company. So,
as we contract with third parties, we can, and in this case, I'm fairly confident we will have done, but I'm not aware of the specifics, so we'll need to follow up with you on that. We can ask them to protect our commercial information, and that is the primary mechanism by which we ensure that matters that are commercially sensitive, that they're not misused by people that we contract with, and that's standard practice in business.
And do these consultants have any exposure to risk themselves, or do they just get a reward from these exercises? I mean, if things haven't gone well, and clearly they haven't gone that well at FMPG, do FMI assume any responsibility for that?
You're asking a legal question, I think.
No, I'm not asking a legal question. I'm asking whether or not, if things don't go according, if they're hired to carry out due diligence, for example.
Yes.
If things don't pan out according to their advice, are they subject to any risk? Is there any clawback? What responsibility rests with them?
That would be pursued through a legal process, and I'm afraid I'm not able to answer that question. I don't know if either of my colleagues have anything that they want to add to that.
Particularly on the FMI report, that was, first of all, benchmarking the yard against competitors. So you asked about would they have knowledge of competitor yards? Certainly, they would be working with yards that would be or potentially competing with Ferguson. So that would be the case. In their second report, where it lays out recommendations for the types of equipment the yard should buy, how they should lay out the shop floor, etc., how they should move materials around the yard, they wouldn't be responsible for the implementation of that report. So they wouldn't take responsibility if the yard does not implement it in the way that they've suggested. So if we don't see the improvements off the back of the report, FMI would not be responsible for that. That would be a responsibility of the management.
Okay. Well, I should declare an interest as on my voluntary register of trade union interests is my membership of the GMB trade union. But you might have been better asking the shop stewards about the layout of the yard rather than spending large amounts of public money asking FMI to provide that for you? And do you not see there might be a conflict of interest if their clients also include people who are competing for these contracts in public procurement against FMPG?
There are contractual mechanisms for addressing those conflicts of interest.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll come back in some of these areas later on, but I think the Deputy Convener's got a short question before Graham Simpson comes in with some more questions.
Thank you. As a supplementary to the first line of questioning. Good morning, gentlemen. Mr Irwin, in response to one of the earlier questions, you stated, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you have full confidence in the board of FMPG, including its current chair. Can I ask you to qualify how you have come to that conclusion, given the Yard's inability to compete in the open market for new business, given the cost overruns, which I'm sure other members will want to come on to? And do you believe that the current board at the Yard is creating a sustainable future for the Yard? And if you believe that to be the case, again, can you please qualify how you've come to that conclusion?
So I said that I am confident that the board is doing everything that it can to pursue that objective of securing a sustainable future for the Yard. So I've absolutely no doubt that they are focused on that question alongside managing other priorities, such as very obviously completing Glen Rosa at the lowest possible cost and putting it into service at the earliest opportunity. Very clearly, the Yard faces challenges. If you look at the cost and delivery record of both vessels, that is not a strong performance record. That's an understatement, what I'm saying. So we need to recognise that. Equally, as Mr McMillan alluded to, we know that the Yard has a long history and that it has a strong record of building certain types of ships. And the view of the board and the management team is, and this is informed by good expert advice, as I understand it, is that they need to focus where the track records of the Yard is strongest and where they are best able to compete nationally and internationally for building those types of ships, simpler ships. Now, we know that there are challenges. Mr McMillan has also pointed out that they have not been successful in two recent procurement exercises. I know that the management team and the board are very focused on developing a revised plan for the commercial strategy and business plan. Colin will know the exact dates, but that will be discussed at the board meeting this month, and we expect to receive that business plan soon after. And our intention is absolutely to work closely with them to provide the support that we can for that, while always operating within obviously the legal frameworks that we operate under. But Colin, I don't know, is there something you want to add to?
Yeah, I mean, I've made the point at these meetings before. I think the current chair has very much strengthened the governance processes of the board. I think he's brought on some really helpful and sort of well qualified talent into the team. And I think in that case he's made a significant impact. We're expecting a new business plan and a new strategy by the end of this month. We've been involved in the development of those plans, so we have a sense of what it will say. But clearly, it's a matter for the board to approve and then come formally to government for its endorsement. That will look at issues like the direction of the investment that has been allocated and promised by government. It will look at what there might happen to do to to look at the cost base of the yard and to make it more competitive, and we'll make a formal judgment when we see that. I don't think anybody, as Gregor said, is in any doubt, however, that there are some fundamental underlying weaknesses with this organisation that we still need to address.
Mr. Green, if I could just add, I think what the yard needs right now is continuity and stability and an absolute focus on the challenges, the many challenges that the yard faces. So Graham Thompson coming in as CEO is really important, but we need to ensure there's continuity and stability around him so he can have the best possible chance of doing what needs to be done.
You talk about continuity and stability. I mean, they're on their fourth chief executive since
Yes.
the yard was nationalised. That's not exactly stability.
No.
And forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I'm getting a sense of a reticence on your part to admit that if things were not going in the right direction, that you would be unwilling to criticise the board, because that would be a reflection on your input. It would be a measure of your failure as a strategic commercial asset division. Because you're so heavily invested in the strategy and the business model, if that fails, then you've failed, and therefore you wouldn't be willing to go on record and criticise them. Indeed, at what point would you sack the board, or would recommend ministers should sack the board if you were unhappy that the business was being not run to its full ability?
The test of what is appropriate to do is what's in the best interests of the government and Ferguson Marine and the local community and our wider economic interests around Ferguson Marine. So we've always been clear on our strategic objectives in our oversight of Ferguson Marine shipyard. And that's been, absolutely central to, for example, the processes as reflected in those 6 papers that led to written authority being requested, a focus on those objectives. So the test is also what's in the best interest of our ability to secure good outcomes for the yards, taxpayers, for island communities, and for the wider economy. I can tell you that there are there's nothing that's black and white. I think it's always the case that there are things that we can all reflect that we could do better, and that's true of everyone involved. But the test of what is appropriate to do is what's in the best interest of securing good outcomes as articulated through those strategic objectives for our intervention in Ferguson Marine.
I'll come back in later.
OK, I'll bring the Deputy Convener back in a little bit later on, but I want to turn now to Graham Simpson, who's got some questions to put to you. Graham.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. I just wanted to ask a general question about SCAD, if you don't mind, initially. But unfortunately, guys, I'm going to go back to Ferguson Marine. About a year ago, we had a meeting with yourselves, and we were told that at that point there were about 40 staff employed in SCAD at various locations. Is that still the position?
Yes. So we have, I think our head count today would be 40. So we have, within that, not everyone works full-time. So the full-time equivalent number might be slightly less, but we have around 40 people. We have 2 finance business partners who work with us. They're not in my line management chain. They report to central finance teams, but they're essential support that's seconded to us. So those 2 are within the 40.
Okay. And what are these various locations that they work in?
Well, our main base, so for me, my office base is Atlantic Quay on the Broomlaw in Glasgow, and that virtually all staff, that would be their main base. Some, if they've transferred from another part of the Scottish Government, their main base could still be our building at Victoria Quay in Leith, or it could be their location could be St Andrew's House. But we work on a hybrid way now in the Scottish Government.
Now, given that you've told us already that SCAD, in relation to Ferguson Marine and maybe other interests, has a kind of light touch approach. You're not involved in the day-to-day running of, let's say, Ferguson Marine. You're shaking your head, Mr. Irwin.
I wouldn't describe it as a light touch approach at all, but
well,
we don't.
You did say it wasn't.
We don't build the ships, and we don't take decisions for the management team, and we respect the role of the boards and our role and responsibility set out in the framework agreement, and we take those responsibilities very seriously, and that's not a light touch approach.
I'm not suggesting you don't take it seriously. What you did say was that you're not involved in the day-to-day running of the yard.
Yeah.
Right. So light touch was my phrase. So don't get too upset by that. So, given that that is your approach, what are these 40 staff doing all day?
I'm happy to pick that up. So we're arranged by units, but I actually think it's probably better to talk about our functions. So we hear about cases of business distress, businesses in distress. So we would often, they come to us via our enterprise agencies because those businesses might be account managed by Scottish Enterprise, Highlands and Isles Enterprise or South of Scotland's Enterprise. They would say to us, business X is in difficulty, and they've heard about that through their account management service, and there's many businesses that they work with. So the first part of the function is just to brief ministers about businesses in distress, or they either come in through that way, through account management, or we hear about it in the press, or a director might pick up the phone to us and say, this business is in distress, is there something the government could do? So our first function, we call it business briefing. It's not focused on intervention, and in almost all of those cases there would be no financial intervention, but we need to make sure that ministers are aware of what's going on, if there's the likelihood of job losses, etc., and have discussions. So I'll give you an example of that. So a little while ago, Stuart Milne Group got into difficulty. We needed to know about that. Ministers needed to know about it. They had sites in many of your members' constituencies. Parliamentary briefing was arranged with a lot of dialogue with the company, a lot of dialogue then with the administration. So one element of what we do is just coordinating all that business briefing and anything that needed to be done with elected members, etc. So that's quite a number of people. But there's no financial interventions in almost all those cases. The second function is where an intervention is at least contemplated. So a business has come to us in one way or the other through these various channels, and there might be an intervention. Now it could be a case of distress. So the business is running out of money, it's lost a contract or something like that. Or it could be positive. The intervention is a business has come into the enterprise and says, we need, I'll just give a figure, £50 million for a new factory. That might be bigger than Highlands and Isles Enterprise or the South of Scotland Enterprise could handle, in a sense, because it's too big for their balance sheet. So they would refer that to us. And again, we would work with the company, due diligence, etc. So there'll either be distress cases or there'll be a positive investment needed there. Now, an example of that recently has been Harland and Wolff. Mm-hmm. There was that company, we weren't sure if they were going to want money from government. So there was a lot of liaison with them, a lot of liaison with the UK government. Ultimately, those assets have passed on to a Spanish shipbuilder, Navantia, and there's been no intervention, but at least it was contemplated as an intervention. So those are the first two. And then the third function is where we have a shareholding. So we have a shareholding in Ferguson Marine. We're talking about a lot today. We also have a shareholding in Glasgow Prestwick. So we have teams that look at those businesses. They sponsor them. And then also alongside that, where we don't have a shareholding, but we have a significant exposure, is to the GFG Alliance, their business up in Fort William.
Yeah.
So we don't own that business. We're not involved with the management of it, but we have a big exposure with them. So in a way, our sponsorship of them is almost akin to being a shareholder, because we need a lot of information about that business. So those are three of the functions. And then the last function, we've talked about it a bit today, is is really what we call our policy function and our project management office. So the policy function, they've been working on the transparency review, and I said earlier on, it's important that they're separate from the teams working on the transaction, so they're not too close. They're the team that have developed with our finance colleagues, the business investment framework. They've been working on the interventions playbook. So they do the policy work and they do all the guidance, etc. And then we have the other remaining function is we have payments that go out, particularly to Ferguson Marine, but there might be arrangements with Prestwick where there might be some money being paid out to the business for capital works. So we have to manage all the financial flows. So those are really the four functions. The 40 is not evenly spread between those, but you could say there's the 40 is spread between those four functions.
I think I'd just add to that because the Strategic Commercial Assets Division was set up to provide a through life or a whole life model for the management of interventions. So if there were a case that we were looking to divest of an asset, that would be handled by the Strategic Commercial Assets Division. And similarly, if another part of government wished to have advice on any part of that life cycle, the division would offer that advice and provide that advice, and there have been cases of that.
Okay. I think possibly the convener might want to explore this a bit more, but that's been very useful. If we can go back to Ferguson Marine, Mr. Rattigan, you mentioned that there had been this benchmarking exercise. How did Ferguson Marine come out of that?
That's the content. That's the content which is redacted in the FMI report. I think it's been alluded to already, and I think it's relatively common knowledge that the Ferguson Marine would not rank in the top tier of shipyards around the world.
Was there? I'm not asking you to name shipyards or give me any figures, but how many shipyards was it benchmarked against?
I don't know the precise number, but the advantage of going to someone like an FMI is that they work with a lot of yards, so they have metrics in their systems for large yards, small yards, yards that do defence work, yards that do small ferries, etc. So I would have thought they're looking at a cohort of at least tens of shipyards across Europe and elsewhere.
And Ferguson's was somewhere near the bottom.
That's the reason that I don't tell you the answer to that.
I don't see how that's commercially sensitive. We're not naming other yards.
No, the reason I don't tell you exactly where they rank is because that would be information that would be of benefit to competitors of the yard, and it could be the kind of information that would deter a customer if they knew where Ferguson ranked.
Well, it really isn't. Given the recent performance of Ferguson's, it doesn't take a genius or a shipbuilding expert to figure this one out, does it?
Clients of the shipyards can draw their own conclusions from publicly available information.
Okay. Let me ask about the Glen Rosa before I ask about more questions about the actual yard. We know the cost has gone up again by about another £35 million, it was reported. Did that require ministerial direction?
No. No, the cost forecasts are provided by the yard.
What figure would require ministerial direction?
So ministerial direction is a device which is available to ministers to require, in this case, the management of Ferguson Marine to do, or the board of Ferguson Marine to do something that they do not want to do.
Okay.
So it's not relevant to this. There is a question about whether written authority will be required by me as the accountable officer in order to be able to release funds to Ferguson Marine to complete ATO to Glen Rosa. Yeah. So as you know, in I think it was May 2023, sought written authority to progress then, and that was provided, and in November last year sought confirmation that that still applies in the light of cost forecasts last year, and that was provided. We will scrutinise very carefully what we're being told by the Yard about this latest cost forecast. That process is underway. We will subject that to external due diligence, and I will do an accountable officer assessment. And if I conclude that it doesn't offer value for money, then we'll follow the established process for handling that and request confirmation that the written authority that's previously been provided, that still applies. But that's different from written direction.
Okay, I get that. So you will get external due diligence done, so you'll hire somebody from outside to,
That is the preferred model.
Okay.
That is what we did as part of the process that led to the written authority being requested in May 2023. That does come at a cost, and it is there's a risk, but there's a risk that it distracts management attention from what they need to be focused on. But that is our preferred model because we want to be as assured as we can be that the costs are as accurate as possible.
What would you have to spend to get that due diligence done?
We will put it to competitive tender, so I'm not entirely sure that I want to put a price on it, but I suppose previous instances that will be public information, is that correct?
Yeah, I think if because we negotiate with suppliers, we don't want to tell them what's the top end of our range, but it would be, I imagine, in the region of £100,000, but it could be higher than that.
All right. Well, it's not a small number.
It's not.
So as things stand, the Yard has said, we think we're going to need another 35 million. As things stand, the government has not said, yes, you can have it.
So the cost forecast estimate was produced, if I remember correctly, 2 weeks ago, last week, 2 weeks ago. So we are scrutinising those numbers just now. I have an obligation to Parliament to fulfil my role as an accountable officer, so that AO assessment will need to be provided. Advice will be provided to ministers on that basis.
So as things stand, the money's not been approved?
No, the process does take time, as you would expect. It should be done in the appropriate way.
Okay. If it's approved, where would that money come from?
So there is insufficient capital allocated in the budget agreed by Parliament to Ferguson Marine to accommodate that. So we are preparing advice to ministers on how that will be handled, and that will require difficult trade-offs and decisions to be made. But that advice is under preparation, and we're exploring that issue with ministers.
That money will have to come from somewhere else.
Correct.
Yes. So have you identified where the money could come from?
We are preparing that advice for ministers. We've not yet sent that to ministers, and we don't yet have a decision from ministers.
Okay. And ultimately, that is a decision for ministers.
Correct.
When would you expect them to take that decision?
I'm sure they'll take that decision at the earliest reasonable opportunity. And as I say, we're preparing that advice just now.
Okay. I mean, this is just the latest increase. Is there a top line above which you will not go to finish off this vessel?
So as an accountable officer, my role is to provide an assessment around the regularity, propriety and value for money of spending such as this, and that is the process that I've followed since I've been in the role every step of the way. If I conclude that on the basis of a value for money assessment, and as I've said before in this committee, it is a fairly narrow value for money assessment according to the terms of the Green Book, Treasury Guidance and the SPFM, then I need to seek written authority. In the past, our ministers have provided that written authority, and as they've done that, they've noted the wider economic benefits that I'm unable to take into account when doing that narrow value for money calculation. And those wider economic benefits include the economic impact of the yards, not just the direct impact of salaries paid to staff in the yard, but the wider economic impact in Inverclyde. And I know that there's a strong interest in this committee to support securing that wider economic benefit within Inverclyde and the wider area.
Okay, let me ask about the yard in general then. So we know that there's no confirmed work beyond the Glen Rosa, not that I'm aware of. Perhaps maybe I'm wrong if you've got other information. No. So once the Glen Rosa's finished, currently that's it. There's no more.
There's no current significant contract. The yard has been doing work for other for third parties, for example, painting work and things like that.
Yeah.
But at the moment, they're still looking for significant new contracts.
Yes. And of course, they've lost out on a couple of contracts recently that they might have been hoping to win. So, in terms of the future of the yard, then, if that remains the case, if they don't win any significant contracts, despite the extra investment, the extra capital investment that's going in, what happens? Have you actually worked out what you would do if that remains the case?
So, at the moment, our focus is absolutely in securing a long-term sustainable future for the yards. We're open-eyed about the challenges of doing that. There is no doubt that the very recent Western Ferries decision that is a setback for the yard. But the work that's being done at the moment on that commercial strategy and the business plan is absolutely critical in this process. We've previously told the committee about work to secure partnership with larger European shipyards that would help to address some of the competitiveness challenges that Ferguson's faces. Those discussions are continuing. There's a limit to what I think it would be appropriate to say about that, but it is an important part of the approach that we're taking. And certainly in the draft commercial strategy that will feed into the business plan that I've seen, that there are a wide range of potential opportunities that the yard believes absolutely fit its strengths. And with the right approach taken in the months ahead, including the successful delivery of Glen Rosa, they'll be well positioned to secure that work. I've got no doubt that that's going to be difficult, but that's what the focus needs to be on. It is true that we need to be we need to consider all possible futures for the yard, but the focus is very much on securing a strong, sustainable future for the yard.
I mean, of course we all want that. We know that. But my question was, what happens if if you're unsuccessful in winning this work? At some point, a decision has to be made, does it not? On what happens? You can't just keep the yard going with no work.
No, that is correct. Yes.
Yes. So, do you have a timescale for that?
We don't have a timescale for that, and we haven't reached a decision point of the sort that you're describing. And as I say, the focus is absolutely on doing everything that we can to secure a sustainable commercial future for the yards. And there's more than one way in which that could happen. We're perfectly, we understand the challenges that we face, but while respecting our respective roles in this process, we're doing everything possible collectively to maximise the chances of a successful future for the yards.
Before I move on to Prestwick, can I just explore? Yeah. Yes, absolutely, of course. Well, I will move on to Prestwick then. And it's quite quick, actually. We've heard previously, in fact, I think it was John Paul Marks, when he was in the Scottish Government, told us that there was interest, new interest, because there's been interest before, so new interest in buying Prestwick. What's the current situation?
So there's a process that's underway. That process began last year, where we saw expressions of interest in Ferguson, in GPA as part of a market testing exercise. I think it's fair to say we're at the stage in the process where it is at its most intensive, and where obviously we're doing what we can to ensure that we reach a satisfactory conclusion to that process. I hate to say, but I think there's a limit to what I can say and should say in this committee. The DFM is committed to come back at the appropriate time and to inform Parliament if there are significant developments in that process. But that is being progressed in a professional and satisfactory manner. And I would hope that in the near future we'd be able to tell you more about that.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Graham, thank you very much. I'm going to move things along straight away and ask Colin Beattie to put some questions to you. Colin.
Thank you, Vera. There's one area which I'm a little bit concerned about. Last year, witnesses said that SCAD doesn't conduct horizon scanning of risk companies or risk sectors or whatever, but it simply support gets referred back. Now, you refer to, for example, the enterprise boards and so on as being one of the conduits. Isn't that a high-risk approach? Isn't that risking missing critical issues out in the market if you're just waiting for things to come in?
Colin in on that, but I suppose just one observation. It's a bit hard to address the specifics of what was said before without having that in front of us. But what Colin can do is explain the approach that we take just now to address the substance of your question.
Yes, I think what was said was that we hadn't adopted the recommendation of EY in the way that they had framed it, which was that there should be a list of whatever number, 50 or so, strategically important businesses for within the Scottish economy that we should monitor on an ongoing basis. We did initially go through that exercise, but we decided that there are better ways and more flexible and agile ways of monitoring what is happening outside in the business community, which is to take a sector-by-sector approach and intervene when we pick up that there is an issue to be dealt with, for example, and we've been able to do that successfully on a number of occasions. So the issue that was what was meant was that there is no list of strategically vital companies that is being monitored on a day-to-day basis. There are, however, sector-by-sector horizon scanning processes going on, which would enable us to identify those and act quickly if there are some issues to address.
The EY report, and I'm going by what's here, that the Scottish Government should formalise monitoring of companies of strategic importance in Scotland. And you would expect that that would be happening as a matter of course. But, of course, the response seemed to indicate that that wasn't the case, and it was really by referral rather than by proactive monitoring of the market.
Proactive monitoring of the market. It's just that we have chosen to do that on a sector-by-sector basis because we think that's more efficient and it allows for greater flexibility than on a pure company-by-company basis. And that's the only difference from the approach recommended by EY. The outcome is the same, and we would argue, based on experience, that it's actually a better way of operating.
I guess there's arguments both ways on that one. Given that from the information we've got is that requests for support come in from various other parties, and again, I'd say you mentioned the enterprise boards earlier on. How many staff are actually engaged? And I think you had about 40 staff, was it, at that time? How many staff are actually engaged in doing that sort of analysis of at-risk companies or sectors?
Dermot will immediately correct me, but I think we have 7 staff in what we call, what he referred to as the business briefing unit, the team within SCAD that carry out that work and the other functions that Dermot described. But of course, they're able to draw upon a much wider network. We have a team of economists within Gregor's DG area. We have the people that are employed by the enterprise agencies who are out and about and meeting businesses and working with them on an account-managed basis. So there are plenty of ways in which that intelligence can flow into the organisation.
The one thing which I haven't really got a feel of is the sort of volumes that come forward. You say you've got these staff who are basically dedicated to this purpose. What sort of volumes are they dealing with? Because some companies might be quite complex. So it could take up a person's time for weeks, months. How many have you got sitting there, for example, at the moment?
I'll pick that up.
Yeah.
So it does vary. so we will see trends where we might see, there are times when I think there's times when construction companies go and they tend to be clustered. So we see small subcontractors and other people going because there's been a downturn in house starts or something like that. So it varies, but I would say on an average caseload there might be, say, 10 cases or so that the team are dealing with. Some of them will be very ephemeral. You know, there'll be a call centre perhaps that's closing in one part of the country. There'll be a lot of briefing about it, depending on how many jobs there are, etc. But it will come to a conclusion within a few months. There'll be others. I think the Harland and Wolff case, that went on a long time. And there was a lot of engagement with the UK government because Harland and Wolff have assets in Belfast and also in the southwest of England. So there's a lot. That one would go on a long time, and it led to a good conclusion with the sale. There's other ones that are not economically very significant, but they have a political dimension or a community dimension. So I would say those might be, some of them have been cultural assets, theatre groups, etc. like that, or they have been social enterprises where the workforce have certain characteristics which make it more likely or more difficult for the workforce to get back into paid employment if those jobs are. So all of what I would say is there's quite a variety of cases. They all have different characteristics. Some of the businesses are quite isolated, others are part of a supply chain. So if we take something like a BiFab, one of the reasons government intervened because BiFab was a key part of the supply chain for the Beatrice offshore wind development. So some of them we have to think why this case is important and then how many connections spring from that business. If the workforce is going to be downsized, what's the prospect of them coming back into employment? Does it affect a town in particular? So we've looked at cases, some of them have been in, say, sea fish processing. They could be in a small town, say in the northeast, and if that one employer goes, it has a very large impact on that town. And again, so all of those things, they all raise different issues. So I would say the average caseload they might be looking at is 10 at a time. Some will be dealt with for a short time. Some of the cases might go on for a year or more, depending on what's happening with the business.
I was interested that you mentioned theatre, yes, which I would never have actually linked to what you're doing. What's the criteria for getting involved in the cultural side? I mean, is it the number of staff? Is it the impact to the local economy? What's the criteria?
I won't mention names, but a lot of cultural bodies, theatres, etc. They run on tight budgets and they rely quite a lot on government grants, etc. So they're always relatively fragile. But these are important assets for communities, cities, etc. So that would be the kind of one where maybe the creative industries team would come to us and say, a theatre or a national company or something like that, they have an issue, and then we would look at it and help them. But in that one, we would be really supporting them. And often it may not come to job losses. There may be a funder, a charitable organisation or something like that that would put money into that kind of business. But I gave that as an example because there's really very broad range from big industrial companies right down to social enterprises, cultural bodies. We would pick up them all because we're sector agnostic. We don't, as long as they've been deemed to have strategic importance to the government in some way, then we would look at them.
I think it's a good example of the process I was trying to describe earlier, which is why that sort of more narrow, a list of 50, which would probably have been predicated on turnover and numbers of staff employed and metrics like that, we found was not the most effective way of supporting ministers effectively. Because there's a group of cultural organisations, for example, that may not meet those criteria, but have a massive impact upon the life of a community or the reputation of Scotland internationally. And that sector-based approach allows for those to come under the purview of SCAD.
So we've got 7 staff who are handling prospects, if you want to put it that way. What do the other 33 do? Are they placed against the existing investments?
Dermot outlined the sort of through-life process that SCAD offers. Some are managing the, as you say, the existing shareholder relationships with FMPG, with Prestwick, our interests in Loch Harbour and the assets of the work of the GFG group. Others are looking at other parts of that, potential divestments, all of those kind of things. So we work throughout the life cycle, the life model.
Given you're not operational, you're not part of management, 33 people against relatively few businesses seems an awful lot of people. I'm not saying they're not needed. I'm just wondering in my own head how that works out, how the allocation of work.
Well, sorry.
We can provide you with more information on this if it's helpful, but there are 11 staff in the numbers that I'm looking in front of me just now who are directly involved in sponsorship and oversight of Ferguson Marine, team of 5, if we've got that right, and then 6 working with GPA, Loch Harbour, and managing our interests in the BIFAB administration. So that's 11 directly working in those areas. But we draw in finance business partners and other expertise as appropriate. And if, for example, the workload on something like Ferguson Marine, it can vary quite considerably. So we do sometimes need to bring in additional capacity, and I suppose the project management office, we have a process at GPA at the moment. The project management office has been involved in that as well. So it's flexible across those different functions. But the workload is quite intense. Even something like the FOIs that were referred to earlier, that requires a considerable amount of time and attention from the team to be able to address those issues. And the transparency review, again, a really important exercise, but that takes time. The process, even just the process of going through these documents, that takes a lot of time, because literally we've got people with the relevant expertise looking line by line to decide what we think it's appropriate given the parameters that are set to release through a process such as this.
The existing investments, although small in number, are very diverse in terms of the skills and expertise that are needed to understand that business. I know that, and I'm going to come to it in a minute about consultants, bring in consultants, the expertise that's needed to manage this, but how much expertise do the people within SCAD actually have in these sectors? Because you're even potentially looking at other sectors outside of this limited number you've got. Yeah. You see where I'm going on this? I'm trying to understand how the people in SCAD get the expertise.
So Dermot may wish to add to this, but I do think it's really important that we focus on what we have to do. So actually, You know, a really important element of expertise is to understand the frameworks that we have to operate under to ensure that we are providing the right sponsorship of those bodies, that there's good governance in place, that financial management is as strong as it can be. So the role of finance business partner is really important there. We need to draw in expertise in subsidy control, in procurement, legal expertise from across government. But the model of SCADs, which you set up, partly, you know, in large part in response to the work of this committee and Audit Scotland and others, is to ensure that we've got those capabilities within a single division so that they can be deployed flexibly. We are mindful of the fact that, you know, I don't know how to run an airport. I don't know how to build ships. But we know that we need to form the right level of understanding of how those businesses operate and to draw in expert technical advice at the appropriate time in the right way. We'll work flexibly with partners. So Scottish Enterprise, for example, if we, you know, when you look at something like Glasgow Prestwick Airport, they're very familiar with the whole cluster of activity around Glasgow Prestwick Airport. You know, we're flexible in our approach while always being mindful that we cannot replicate the expertise that's embodied within the organisations that we have oversight of.
Now, given what you've said, are you satisfied that, as far as possible, there's, you know, ministers are not going to get surprises coming down the line? You're doing horizon scanning, as far as I can understand from what you're saying. Therefore, you should be picking up in the market where there's issues arising. Yeah. And the last thing anybody wants is a sudden emergency which creates a crisis. You know, are you satisfied that what you've got in place will pick that up at an early stage?
So I'm satisfied that it's proportionate and that it's the right approach that we're taking. There will always be surprises. There are macro-political and economic shocks that occur that impact on the economy in ways which are not always foreseeable. But we need to be able to respond and adapt our approach to surveillance of companies that are potentially at risk, quickly in order to be able to respond to changing circumstances. So I'm confident it's the right approach. But there, you know, will there ever be surprises? Of course, there will be.
Just my last question really is in connection with external consultants, which always raise a question. In 23-24, you appear to have spent 1.6 million on external consultants. What sort of spend have you got for 24-25?
So I'll pick that up. So we have a budget for consultancy which has been fixed for the last few years at £1.9 million.
Sorry, how much was that?
We have a budget of
1.9.
Yeah, 1.9 million. This financial year that's just closed at the end of 25, we will be significantly over that. The biggest factor that's pushing us over that has been the work that we've been doing. Gregor talked about it being very intense at the moment around Glasgow Prestwick Airport. We had approaches, people interested in the airport. We started to market the airport and seek expressions of interest. Then there's been a number of diligence processes, etc., to get to the period where we are now that Gregor described. That has been expensive and essentially has been demand-led in the sense that it came forward from the industry taking an interest in the airport. So I think for 24-25, we will be over £3 million for that year, opposed compared to our budget of just under 2 million.
Perhaps I can add to that, just to give you the assurance that we've spoken before about the review of the role of the strategic assets review group, which Gregor chairs, and one of the things that we report to every meeting is the consultancy spend that's being occurred. So we do look at it and test ourselves to make sure it's appropriate.
But all that excess over budget is related to Prestwick?
The bulk of the excess, yes.
The bulk?
Yeah, because we
I think it's fair to say that the element that we were not planning on
yes.
When that budgeting process was being undertaken was an intensive process for Prestwick. So that is the bit that we were not necessarily anticipating doing during 24-25.
Well, my next question was going to be, based on the 1.6 million, is that the sort of level you anticipate being at going forward? I'm not sure what the answer to that would be.
So it depends on circumstances, the circumstances that we face. And for example, very obviously, it depends on what happens with that Prestwick process. Yeah. So we will... I think the key point is that there's proper oversight and scrutiny of these budgets that Colin has referred to, and that we are constantly ensuring that we are not incurring unnecessary expenditure, and that we are quite demanding, not quite demanding, extremely demanding of our advisors. And I certainly like to think that's what we are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In the interest of time, I'm going to go straight to the Deputy Convener. Jamie.
Thank you, Convener. I've got a lot of ground to cover, so we'll try and rattle through some of this, and I'm sorry if it does revisit some earlier subjects, just the nature of questions. But let's return to Ferguson Marine. I had some unanswered questions. Has anyone in the Scottish Government, particularly in your divisions, asked Ferguson Marine what they need £35 million for exactly?
Yes. So we've received the plan. So the plan for the vessel, Glen Rosa, that is being scrutinised by our technical advisor. So the first stage is to look at the plan. It's very, very detailed. It has many, many layers to it. Our advisors, CMAL, are going through that, and we're challenging the sequencing of activities. So it might say there'll be a certain amount of pipe work installed before a gearbox is installed or something. So that kind of level of detail we would go to our technical advisors to say, is the sequencing of the plan, does that make sense? And is it in a logical order? And then is it complete? So they will look at that, and then they'll also look at the resource against that. Is it Ferguson resource? Is it subcontractors, etc.? So once there's stability with the plan, and that's what the Yard's been working on for quite a lot of time, that will be costed out by the finance team within Ferguson Marine. So they have done that to come up with the figure of 172.5 plus 12.5 contingency. So we are, one of our first stages of looking at the cost numbers is to probe, is the contingency number just a flat percentage applied to the 172, or is it actually individual lines? So we've worked through that with the Yard. What we will now do, as Gregor said, is we need to interrogate that for the AO process. So it's very likely we would bring on board an external advisor to us who will literally work through lines in the financial model to make sure that the thing works in the way that an accountant would expect it to work, and that it's generating numbers that can be relied upon. So the first stage is really a review of the plan, and then we go into the cost accounting, and then there's challenging. CMAL help us with the challenge of the plan, and then an advisor and our own financial officers will be looking and interrogating the cost model to make sure that everything has been driven down.
Just to get this right in my head, so, I mean, £35 million is a lot of money.
Yes.
I mean, it's nearly the cost of the original planned cost of the whole vessel. but that's on top of what's already been spent on it. So, you're talking about some really big numbers. What I'm trying to get my head around is what is driving this huge overrun. There must be something sitting there that's the elephant in the room. There must be something that's driving such a massive cost overrun. Is it something that was installed that doesn't work? Is it something that's not been installed that's now defunct? Is it the cost of people to deliver it? I've got no idea if this is capex or if it's resource or, it's, at the end of the day, it's public money. So surely we've got a right to understand what they're asking for.
Yeah, so we've started work on breaking down the cost numbers. The focus has been on the plan and actual activities in the plan. But there will be various headings that drive the increase to the 35. So some of that is coming through from subcontractor costs may have risen. Parts of it would be that as they've worked through the vessel, they've worked through lessons learned on Glen Sannox. They realise some things that were done in the wrong way on Glen Sannox were also done on the wrong way on Glen Rosa. So there is an element of rework that's still working through. And then they're just allocating updated costs to activity. So various processes carried out by the yard staff.
Presumably on top of the 35, though, there'll still be the ongoing monthly operational costs of keeping the yard running, which includes staffing costs, etc. That would be in addition to the additional capital that they've asked for, is that right? And how much would that be?
So what we do, so the yard come to us for contractual payments. So we look at those on a monthly basis. They're scrutinised by CMAL for us. Our own finance officers scrutinise them. These are contractual costs. Mm-hmm. The yard also has some costs which it cannot allocate either to the vessel contracts or to private work. Now, I'll give you an example of that. When they were building 2 ferries at the same time, they would have allocated, say, the rates bill roughly between those 2 projects. Now that they have 1 vessel to build, the rates bill can't be allocated completely to Glen Rosa. So you're left with some costs that you can't reduce, you have to pay them, but we would classify them as under-recovered. So for the year 23-24, under-recovered costs were small, they were 0.5. In the financial year that has just closed up to the end of March, we are expecting those under-recovered costs that can't be recovered from contracts, to be in the region of 3.2 million for the year that's just closed.
So is 3.2 million the base cost of keeping the yard, keeping the lights on, keeping the workforce in it? No,
we wouldn't look at it that way, in the sense that if you're employing people and it's a legitimate cost to recover from a contract.
Yeah.
For Glen Rosa, Glen Sannox, that certain costs can be allocated there. If you have private work for BAE or anyone else, again, some of the overhead can be allocated to them, but you're always left with a residual. Now, because Gregor mentioned this earlier, the yard bid intensively for 2 pieces of work in the last year, so SVRP and Western Ferries. There's an awful lot of design work, a lot of work just bidding costs. Now that, for SVRP 1, that would run into hundreds of thousands of pounds to bid for a £175 million contract. They're very large bidding costs. That cannot be allocated to the Glen Rosa build, and it cannot be allocated to private work, say for BE.
Okay.
That would be an under-recovered cost, but it's something that we want the yard to do, and it's a legitimate expense. We expect them to bid for work, and it has to be covered by us.
It's just unfortunate that they did spend that money and didn't get the contracts. On that, can I ask if anyone in the Scottish Government advised ministers to directly award any of those contracts? So, for example, take the Small Vessel Replacement Programme. Presumably, it would have been in the interest of the yard to be given the work. Did SCAD offer any advice to ministers as to whether or not they should direct award that work? And if so, what was the response of ministers?
The procurement of vessels is a matter for a different part of government and through their contracting organisations, CMAL. So it was not something that we would have been directly involved in that process as SCAD.
Okay, so isn't that strange though? Wouldn't SCAD want the yard to get work? Did you not make representations to either CMAL or the Transport Division of the Scottish Government?
Of course, from a shareholder perspective, as the people in the government that are oversee the management of Ferguson Marine, I want to do everything I can to ensure that they get future work, like everybody in this room today, and certainly everybody who's working at the yard. But the procurement process is a different element of government, and it's taken through a different line.
It is as part of the work done by Transport Scotland and CMAL and that side of government. Consideration before we got into the procurement exercise was given to the question of a direct awards. But as the Deputy First Minister has noted previously, that is the ability to do that is restricted for a number of different reasons, including subsidy control. And in a highly contested market, there are risks associated with that process if you proceed with the direct awards without being very confident of your legal position, that there is every prospect that will be subject to legal challenge, and that would have delayed, that would have proved detrimental to the yards, and that would have delayed the procurement of those vessels. Okay. So there are a number of different interests that we're seeking to be managed through that process.
Okay. Moving on to another strategic investment under your control, can I ask if the Scottish Government is undertaking any current analysis of developments with regards to Liberty Steel? Mr Urban, you'll obviously be aware of media reports yesterday around attempts to adjourn a winding up petition lodged by one of its creditors, which could result in SSUK being forcibly moved into compulsory liquidation, given that the Scottish Government has had and still does have interactions in this space. Is that a risk?
I can pick that up. So we do a lot of monitoring of group companies within the GFG Alliance. So up to the point of we may send English solicitors to observe court cases in England if we think they have ramifications for the Scottish businesses. And we also speak very directly to executives within the GFG group, particularly in Liberty Steel. So the company that you've referred to, Liberty Speciality Steel, is a large business. It's a large business. It doesn't have any employees in Scotland or operations in Scotland. It's mostly, I understand, based around Sheffield and Rotherham. But it employs 1,500 staff. It's a strategically important business. So we take an interest in it because what we could have is contagion within the Liberty Steel Group. And if one large element of it was to be wound up, we'd want to know, does that affect the businesses in Scotland, DL in particular? So we take an interest in it. We do active monitoring of it, and we speak to the business. So what we have been told from the business is there's not, between these subsidiaries within Liberty Steel of Speciality Steel and DL, those two businesses are not linked. They're not, one doesn't supply the other. Okay. They do a different kind of product range. So Speciality Steel is an important business because they do very high grade steel products that go into the defence sector, aerospace, etc. And I know from discussions we have with the UK government, they are very interested in that business because I think key businesses that rely on specialty steel are people like perhaps Rolls-Royce and people that are in the aerospace supply chain. But from what we have been told at the moment is we don't think there's a connection between the two businesses in terms of intercompany lending, and DL and Speciality Steel don't buy products from each other. So we will see what happens today. I think the order might be given today that business would be wound up. It would go into an administration process, etc. We would, at that point, we'd probably have discussions with the administrator in England and just work out from them if there's any connections with the Scottish Government. But from when GFG at the moment are telling us the two subsidiaries don't have a strong interaction.
Okay, that's really helpful, actually. So just to be clear, at the moment, there's no identified immediate risk of the Scottish Government being a creditor to that business if it was liquidated?
We have no links. The Scottish Government have no links with specialty steel.
Okay, and equally, if that business did collapse, that would have no knock-on or sideways effect on any current Scottish Government investments, to your knowledge at the moment?
Yes, we are monitoring that, and we take indications from the business. If the business goes into administration, then we would be able to also have discussions with the administrator to ask those kind of questions. But as far as we know, the two are not intimately linked.
Can I refer back to the previous line of questioning? It's maybe a more wider SCAD question, and that's about how you take decisions or make recommendations to ministers about interventions. Looking at your interventions at the moment, I presume each of those were inherited when SCAD was set up. So those are not, if you like, proactive decisions made by your department to intervene in the market. And you've got Bifab, Prestwick, Lochaber, steel, shipbuilding, airports. These are heavy industries. These are strategic national assets. But I think the question posed by another member was lots of people come and knock on your door looking for support and help when they're failing or in distress. My question is, since SCAD has been established, how many other companies have you actually supported?
I'll pick that up. I think I'll go back to the thrust of your question. You're right. This is, and I do want to emphasise that this is partly why SCAD was created, because transactions were made over recent years, and they were done by teams that had a sectoral focus. So if you happen to be the manufacturing team, and an intervention was proposed in manufacturing, you led. If it happened to be a renewable supply chain company, it would be led by the folk who normally work on renewables. With the airport, it would be aviation policy people that was picked up. And then the risk of that was the learning wasn't consolidated. We didn't bring together the management of these assets. So we have done that in SCAD now. So we've brought those together. We still have links with all of the policy teams, whether they're aviation, manufacturing, renewables, etc. So we can still draw on that work. I think when SCAD was being created, the other point to make is SCAD was being created in 2022. That wasn't. We were still in the wake of COVID. You know, the COVID repercussions. There was a lot of public sector support, principally led by the UK government, but also led in Scotland. I think there was an expectation at that time that we might need to be more interventionist for a period of time. But that actually, in reality, Mr Green, that hasn't come through.
Yeah, so I'm really keen to get an answer to the question, if that's okay.
In terms of large-scale interventions, there have been no other large-scale interventions. But we actually do provide support to businesses in a range of different ways. Okay. And sometimes that is indirect. So, for example, we may have circumstances where there are redundancies and we need to provide support to the workers who are affected. And one of the things that the Business Briefing Unit, working with partners elsewhere in government, will do is to ensure that that process is as efficient and effective as it can be. There may be a SDS, Skills Development Scotland, angle there. We also work closely with the enterprise agencies, and sometimes the enterprise agencies, going through their processes and working through their governance, they may be the right party to help a business that's facing a particular type of challenge. So there are circumstances there where, you know, through our triage, the enterprise agencies have picked up the challenge of working with that business. And then there is a third category, and I think Grangemouth might typify this, where there is a business which is a set of businesses which are very clearly a cluster that's very clearly of major strategic importance to Scotland, where we're working with a range of different partners. But the support is in the form, well, one of the primary forms of support is through Project Willow, and then through the Just Transition Fund and also working with UK government, with the National Wealth Fund becoming involved. So I use that as an example of the range of different ways in which government can get involved in supporting businesses in difficulty, and what SCAD does, working with partners across government, is to bring rigour and discipline and good decision making to that, so that we ensure that we're taking the right approach in the right circumstances. And quite often that will mean that actually there's no role for government or those agencies.
But do you not see that, government's clearly made decisions to intervene financially to the tunes of billions of pounds of public money in certain industries, certain companies. But people are knocking on your door on a daily basis looking for support. Now, the point that was raised earlier was an interesting one, that if you look at other sectors such as cultural, arts, social impact, the third sector, and so organisations are really hitting financial walls. And I think it was a point that Mr. Rattigan made, when they go under, the people employed in those industries find it more difficult to find alternative work. Therefore, the economic output for those people are poor. But none of them seem to have received any intervention from you. So can you see why people might think you're pumping billions of pounds into steel, into shipbuilding, into press? And I'm not saying don't do that, but the other side of it are getting absolutely nothing.
So I might bring Colin in here, who's been very intensively involved in some challenges with social enterprises. There might be limits to what you can say about specific cases, Colin, but I'll leave it to you to explain the approach. But we very much involved in trying to provide appropriate support to a wide range of different businesses.
Okay. Yes, just to sort of add to that, what we've, as you've observed, Deputy Convener, since the creation of SCAD, there has not been a decision for government to take an ownership stake in a particular enterprise, and that is true, and you're absolutely correct. The ones that we're managing were predate SCAD. There have been many occasions where we've offered advice, where our enterprise agencies and others have offered support, and we're currently working with a number of organisations, including in the social enterprise space that Gregor mentioned, where there may be some form of government assistance is required in order to allow that organisation to continue and prosper. But that is likely to fall short of government ownership, albeit a different type of intervention than government ownership.
And just as an example of that, procurement is one of the ways in which we do interact with some social enterprises. But again, we operate within a very clear legal framework around subsidy control in the case of procurement. But we would be as creative as possible while working within the legal frameworks that we have to operate under, and while always making good AO assessments about the return on investments in providing appropriate support delivered in the right way by the part of the system that is best capable of providing that support. But also recognising one of the things that quite often we have to do is to advise our ministers not to intervene.
Yeah, I'm sure that is the case, we could spend all day talking about the business investment framework, but we haven't got time. My last question is simply this one, and that's, you'll be aware of the heavily redacted reports that were given. I just have a simple question. Given the sheer levels of redaction, and just for the benefit of people watching, this is what we were presented with: the risk register, the contingency. I'm not making this up. If I was to FOI this document, would I receive more information in it than I've been given as a committee member?
Sorry.
I was going to say, no, the redactions were based upon the application of FOI principles, so those two approaches would be consistent.
Okay, and what are you doing to make sure that committees like this, public audit committees, and Audit Scotland and other independent bodies have access to transparency, accountability, so that we can evaluate public for money and not get lots of black pages presented to us?
So the fact is that we've redacted information that is commercially sensitive. If we're not careful, that will jeopardise the future of Ferguson Marine. It'll make it even harder. They've just in the Western Ferries procurement exercise, they've lost out to Camel Lairs. So we need to be careful about the information that we publish. But having said that, and it's in the transparency review, we recognise that there's more that we can do to improve transparency. So the way in which we commission and structure reports, we want to change that in future so that while commercial sensitivities are handled, you will get more information about the issues that are being addressed in those reports. And we absolutely want to go as far as possible in that regard and in our review of individual reports to help you and to ensure that we are being as transparent as we can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Convener. And as the saying goes, the proof will be in the pudding. I've just got a few loose ends I wanted to tie up with you before we finish the session off. First of all, on that last point, why on earth is there any commercial confidentiality issues around the terms of reference for the study being carried out by FMI? Why is that commercially sensitive?
Well, I'll pick that up. So that could have been sensitive for FMI themselves, where they didn't want to reveal the scope of their work, what they're doing.
But this is work using public money that the Scottish Government has commissioned a private consultancy company to carry out. Why shouldn't we even at least know what the scope of their work is, what their terms of reference are?
Well, that's something we can reflect on again, because we've, as Gregor said, we've committed to periodic review of these things, and certainly one of the things that does change over time is some things become less sensitive over time. What essentially that report is trying to do is saying, what kind of shipyard is this? Is it a competitive shipyard, etc.? So if a reader could draw the implication from that the shareholder, if they're asking for that, thinks that this is not a competitive shipyard, etc. So we've tried to put ourselves in the mind of the reader, and if they happen to be a supplier or a customer, what inference would they draw from the language? Well,
the Public Audit Committee deals a lot of the time with optimism bias. I think we're experiencing this morning some pessimism bias. I don't think it's unreasonable for the objective terms of reference of a piece of work that's been commissioned by the Scottish Government should be in the public domain.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is reasonable. I suppose at the risk of addressing. I don't have the unredacted version in front of me here, but I could certainly conceive of circumstances where we will ask in a terms of reference for a very specific piece of analysis to be done, which could be commercially sensitive, that we're seeking that particular piece of work to be done. So there's an example of why it may be appropriate. But let me just reassure you, we take very seriously the challenge of ensuring that in our future procurement of commercial advice and reports of this sort, that we do structure them in a way that aids transparency, and also that we ensure that there are the minimum terms that are necessary for the provider to be willing to contract with us, but without creating additional difficulties for us being transparent subsequently. And I think that's one of the reflections that we've got on the process that we've been through as part of this review, and there's more that we can do there to support you, and we want to do that. OK, well, we'll see what happens in the future. Can I turn to some of the other recommendations of the Transparency Review and get an update from you on where you are with that? So you've pledged to create a web page with up-to-date information on SCAD and its work. Have you done that? That will be launched in early summer. OK, so not yet. That you will establish a transparency assurance panel to review the sensitivity status of material recorded in SCAD's Register of Commercial Advice. Have you established the Transparency Assurance Panel? So the terms of reference and membership for that group, they're being developed. We expect the first meeting will be in September this year. So that's a no as well? I can happy to provide you to explain. Yeah, but not yet is the answer, isn't it? The proposal is for that to meet in September this year. You will see that we want to have biannual review, so it is in good time to have biannual review. So it's being done at the appropriate way. We need to make sure that we get that group set up in the right way. OK.
And you also agreed with a recommendation which emanated from this committee's work around the arrangements for the ferries 801, 802, when we took evidence to suggest that there had been direction to the board of CMAL in the guise of shareholder authorisation. So you've committed that you will now publish instances. Parliament will be notified where equivalent things happen in the future. Is that correct?
There's an important distinction between shareholder authorisation and written direction. Shareholder authorisation, the circumstances under which that is required, those are set out in the framework agreement. That is a regular part of our relationship with the assets that we sponsor. There is a commitment to publish summaries of shareholder authorisation data by type of approval and date on the website. But as I say, that's a regular part of the relationship, and that is set out in the framework agreement. Written direction is different. That is when ministers...
Written authority.
Written authority is different again. Written authority is when I, as an account... There are three different issues here which are being conflated, and it's really important that we separate them. There's shareholder authorisation, there's written authority, which is something that an accountable officer might seek if they are unable to be assured that they're operating in a proper, regular manner that's consistent with value for money. Written direction is when ministers instruct, as a shareholder, instruct the board of one of our strategic assets to do something that they would not otherwise be willing to do. In the case of Ferguson Marine, the framework agreement already says that if that happens, then it will be disclosed to Parliament in a manner consistent, I think, roughly speaking, with the process for written authority. What we have done is we've committed to update the business investment framework and the SPFM to make it to record instances of where a written direction has been provided for assets that are managed by the Strategic Commercial Assets Division.
Okay. Well, look, again, we will view that in light of future experience. Can I then turn to the other issue which we've been looking at this morning, but we haven't really dwelt on significantly? And again, I just wanted to run through this as a matter of record. One of the pieces of information which you disclosed to us back in February, which was quite transparent and open, was the EY study into BIFAB. And at the end of that report, there were a series of recommendations that Ernst & Young made to the Scottish Government about how it might improve things in future cases. And it spoke about, and we've touched on this already, about identifying, I don't think it did say, key sectors of strategic importance that the government ought to identify. It spoke about engagement with public sector agencies that SCAD should be engaged in. We've heard a little bit of how that goes on, although I would be interested to know whether the Scottish National Investment Bank is part of that engagement process. But can I turn to three particular recommendations that were contained in that report and ask you, Director General, whether or not you have implemented these recommendations or not? One was a recommendation that the Scottish Government should establish a standardised triage process for intervention requests, a kind of go/no-go decision framework. Have you done that?
Yes.
Excellent. Next one was the establishment of an independent panel to provide challenge and review to any proposed interventions. Have you established that?
So we agree with the substance of that recommendation, but we are addressing it in a different manner. Rather than setting up an independent panel, we're using SARG, the Strategic Assets Review Group, which was already established, which fulfils that function. And SARG was set up in May 2022. It provides that internal scrutiny. I chair it, but the internal challenge comes from a range of other participants who are on that body, including other Directors General, the Permanent Secretary, a Non-Executive Director and the Chief Financial Officer, also the CEO of Transport Scotland. So there's a well-established body that's fulfilling that function, and we chose to work with that rather than to dismantle that structure and to create a new one.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And the final recommendation I just want to put to you, again, I think you alluded to it much earlier on in this morning's evidence session, was about the establishment of a shareholder function with responsibility for managing ongoing interventions. I don't know whether that's, to all intents and purposes, that's a strategic commercial assets division.
It's core business of,
yeah,
of SCAD.
That's fine, that's fine. OK, well, just one final question from me then, and it goes back to the GFG Alliance. You've alluded to proceedings currently underway around the specialist steel division, which is part of the GFG Alliance. But we're interested in this committee as well about a statement put out in February of this year, headed up, the GFG reaches agreement with Greensill creditors. Greensill went into administration, that was its financial backer and so on global debt settlement terms. So could you explain to us what that refinancing agreement means for the businesses owned by the GFG Alliance in Scotland?
I'm happy to.
Mr. Rattigan? Yeah.
Yes. So we're not one of those creditors. So we're not a party at the table. But I think there's three main parties: is the administrators of Greensill Capital, the administrators of Greensill Bank, and then some of these debts that were run up by the business ultimately ended up with Credit Suisse. So I think those are roughly, they call them the Vienna creditors. I think that's just where they meet them. But the debt to them, we don't have visibility of it, but going on what's been reported in the papers, that group of creditors collectively may be owed in the region of $5 billion. So it's a very large amount of money. They've been negotiating with them since Greensill collapsed in 2021. So we're 4 years on now. What they're trying to do is get to an agreement about the quantity of money that would be paid back to them. So how many pence in the pound of that debt would be paid back to that group of creditors. And then between the creditors, they have to agree how it would be apportioned. So does someone get paid first? Does someone get paid last, etc.? And they all have different rights and different securities. So this is a complicated picture as it's relayed to us from GFG. Some of the assets of the business are better. Some of them hold cash. Now, they might hold cash, say, in their Australian businesses. The creditors there might have rights to decide whether any of that cash can come out of Australia to pay some of their other global creditors. So what they're working on there is trying to get all of these creditors aligned and to sign up to some overall agreement. Now, the reason why that's important to us, although there's no debt from the Scottish businesses at Lochaber or at DL to these creditors, because this credit arrangement can't be settled, what it's stopping the group doing, they can't go to other financiers and raise more money now. So since 2021, GFG has been prevented from taking on more debt. So the business is effectively has been starved of working capital. So where that affects us in Scotland and the Scottish businesses, they're having to generate their own cash for any investment they want to do. They can't rely on the group headquarters to give them working capital because all of that is tied up in these arrangements with their global creditors. Yeah, but Mr. Atkin, what's the situation now? Because when I read Mr. Gupta's comments in February, in his press release, this is the executive chairman of the GFG Alliance, Mr. Gupta says, today's agreement is a great relief. It will enable us to push on from the deep challenges caused, including we're now confident we'll be able to access longer-term financing to build on the significant investments we already have. So, I mean, what does that mean for Lochaber? What does it mean for Motherwell? What does it mean for Clyde Bridge? So, what I'll give you is what they tell us. You know, the true picture could only be known by GFG and the creditors. What they tell us was they signed that agreement in February, and that was probably locking down the quantum that would be paid back to those main creditors. and probably the arrangements about who would be paid first, etc., etc. What they have run into, and this is what they've told us, is that the area of the business that has cash is in Australia. There's cash there. They want to free that up to pay back these other creditors. The creditors in Australia have been able to prevent that. So as far as we understand, they reached this agreement with the main creditors, but they've not been able to execute the agreement because of restrictions on how that cash that resides in Australia is being used. For us, the implication for those businesses, particularly at DL, I think it's, as we're saying, essentially that's been starved of cash. The business that we have a stronger relationship with at Fort William has been able to generate some cash itself to deal with all of its day-to-day needs. But there's not expansion capital. There's not the money there to go ahead and invest in the businesses and to, grow their product range, grow their add value to the products, all the rest of it. So the business is stymied, essentially.
Okay. I mean, I'll just finish with this point, Mr. Raskin. I think you used the expression earlier in the meeting that you thought the GFG Alliance arrangement in Lochaber meant that the Scottish Government had big exposure. So I think the continuing interest this committee has in the fortunes and business performance and serious fraud office inquiries and all the other things that go along with the GFG Alliance is that what exposure does that place the Scottish Government and Scottish public funds to? So we retain a keen interest in this area especially. On that note, I'm going to have to draw this morning's proceedings to a close. We've run quite a way over our anticipated time. So in light of that, can I thank our witnesses this morning for your attendance and your willingness to answer the questions that we've had for you. So Dermot Rattigan, Colin Cook and Director General Gregor Irwin, can I thank you very much indeed for your evidence this morning. And I will now move the committee into private session. Thank you.